Much, amazingly much, was left of the object despite the lapse of 500 years. The skeleton, though crushed in places by the jaws of the thing that had killed it, held together with surprising firmness, and we gloated over the clean white skull and its long, firm teeth, and its eyeless sockets that once had glowed with a carnal fever like our own. In the coffin lay an amulet of curious and exotic design, which had apparently been worn around the sleeper's neck. It was the oddly conventionalized figure of a crouching winged hound, or sphinx with a semi-canine face, and was exquisitely carved in antique oriental fashion from a small piece of green jade. The expression of its features was repellent in the extreme, savoring at once of death, bestiality, and malevolence. Around the base was an inscription in characters which neither St. John nor I could identify, and on the bottom, like a maker's seal, was graven a grotesque and formidable skull. Immediately upon beholding this amulet, we knew that we must possess it, that this treasure alone was our logical pelf from the centuried grave. Even had its outlines been unfamiliar, we would have desired it. But as we looked more closely, we saw that it was not wholly unfamiliar. Alien it indeed was to all art and literature which sane and balanced readers know, but we recognized it as the thing hinted of in the forbidden Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, the ghastly soul symbol of the corpse-eating cult of inaccessible Ling in Central Asia. All too well did we trace the sinister lineaments described by the old Arab demonologist, lineaments he wrote drawn from some obscure supernatural manifestation of the souls of those who vexed and gnawed at the dead. Yes, my friends, today we're talking about the Hound. Today's Mythos Monday. For today, yes, today we're talking about the Hound. It's a pretty creepy story by H.P. Lovecraft, one of his creepiest actually, and one of his most over the top, at least as far as the writing was concerned. I can't believe I haven't talked about the Hound up to this point. Now, a lot of Lovecraft scholars have a low opinion of the Hound. They think it was a little over the top usually. S.T. Joshi thinks it was a kind of self-parody. I'm not so sure that it was. Not at all, actually. And it's actually a pretty effective story, which is why it's been anthologized frequently. It's a heck of a little horror story, actually. So the Hound. So there's this guy who lives with St. John. And these two guys in England, they're kind of creepy, these two guys. They're into some, well, kind of sick stuff, frankly. And they've got a whole museum underneath St. John's house of ghastly horror. I can do no better than to read the little bit where they're describing their ghastly museum of horror, because these two, man, they're a couple sick guys, these two. Yeah, so let me just read this paragraph here so you get a better idea. I cannot reveal the details of our shocking expeditions, or catalog even partly the worst of the trophies adorning the nameless museum we prepared in the great stone house where we jointly dwelt, alone and servantless. Our museum was a blasphemous, unthinkable place, where, with the satanic taste of neurotic virtuosi, we had assembled a universe of terror and decay to excite our jaded sensibilities. It was a secret room, far, far underground, where huge winged demons carven of basalt and onyx vomited from wide grinning mouths weird green and orange light, and hidden pneumatic pipes ruffled into kaleidoscopic dances of death the lines of red carnal things hand in hand, woven in voluminous black hangings. Through these pipes came at will the odors our moods most craved. Sometimes the scent of pale funeral lilies, sometimes the narcotic incense of imagined eastern shrines, of the kingly dead, and sometimes, how I shudder to recall it, the frightful soul-upheaving stenches of the uncovered grave. Around the walls of this repellent chamber were cases of antique mummies, alternating with comely lifelike bodies, perfectly stuffed and cured by the taxidermist art, and with headstones snatched from the oldest churchyards of the world. Niches here and there contained skulls of all shapes, and heads preserved in various stages of dissolution. There one might find the rotting bald pates of famous noblemen, and the fresh and radiantly golden heads of new buried children. Yeah, that's pretty creepy. So St. John and his pal here have a room underneath their house full of ghastly relics of horror, terrifying paintings, bodies, pieces of bodies, severed heads, all kinds of ghastly, awful things, that they just collected because they're really creepy, these two. And one of their most entertaining pastimes for them is to go and dig in graveyards and steal corpses. Everybody's got to have a hobby, and I guess that's theirs, grave robbing. Everybody has their thing, I guess. And that was their thing. They like to rob graves and take bodies and pieces of bodies home and all kinds of other creepy stuff that they'd find, in graves. So we've got a couple really creepy guys here who are way into this stuff. Somehow they managed to find each other, these two, and decide, hey, we got to live together because, we're into the same nasty, awful stuff. But they made the mistake of going to a graveyard in Holland and digging up the body of this notorious thing. Now, this story, The Hound, has sometimes been described as a vampire story. In fact, in some vampire anthologies, I think the Penguin Book of Vampire Stories has the story in it. I could be wrong. I'm not at home, so I can't check. But this has sometimes been described as a vampire story because the creature in the grave sort of seems like a vampire. He seems even more monstrous than that. He seems more terrible than even a vampire, the thing they find in this grave. And in that bit that I described at the beginning, you see that they found an amulet that was described in the dreaded Necronomicon. Now, if you ever find anything that was described in the dreaded Necronomicon, just leave it. Don't take it home. Don't pick it up. Don't bring it home to put it in your ghastly corpse museum. Don't do that. It's a bad idea, as these guys found out. Because once they brought home this amulet and put it in their little corpse museum, all kinds of horrible things started to happen. There was this terrible howling that started to happen around their house. Now, they live on the moors, of course, because if you've got a hound howling, it's got to be on the moors. H.P. Lovecraft did read Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, so it's no surprise where he came up with the title of the story and the idea of the story, probably. But Sir John, one day, goes out on the moors, or is wandering home from the moors, and meets a terrible fate. You see, up to this point, they've been hearing this strange howling. And sometimes when they look up in the sky in the darkness, they see kind of a fluttering figure, perhaps. Well, one day when Sir John was coming home on the moors, something got to him and tore him apart into little pieces. Now, our narrator knows exactly what this thing is, where it's from, why it's here. It's all about that amulet. He brought home a cursed object to put in his dreadful horror corpse museum. Bad idea. So after St. John is torn apart, he decides to destroy his little corpse museum and try to bring back the amulet to the graveyard, to the thing that he stole it from. Whether he accomplishes this or not, I leave it up to you to find out. This is a little story, but it's a good one. I like it an awful lot. Not everybody does, like I say. Some people think that the language in this story is just too Lovecraft. It's just too over the top. To the point where, like I said, A.C. Joshi describes it as a parody. I think it's pretty effective for what it is. This could be because I have a high tolerance for Lovecraft melodrama, but I like this story a lot. It's a creepy story. It's just a dreadful horror story. It reminds me also of the 1950s EC comic stories that came later. This is the kind of thing you'd find in those comics where you have a ghastly characters who are into really gross things and they meet the end that they deserve. You won't find the Hound in every Lovecraft anthology. I urge you to find it though and give it a read. I mean, if you're into pulp horror, you certainly should read the Hound. It's a fun little Lovecraft story. So there you go, the Hound. This week's Mythos Monday here at the ever creepy Rustic Vaughan Lodge. Be sure to catch me tomorrow. I don't have a tag tomorrow. I'm doing an update video. I've got a couple updates I have to do, and I want to talk about a couple things. So catch me tomorrow on Tuesday for Tagless Tuesday, and I will see you then. What are you doing over there? You're a terrible, terrible hound. A terrible hound.